So we will now have a discussion with law of war expert and lecturer, Ibu Diajeng Christi. How do you assess the current conditions in the perspective of war? Ibu Christi.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for the questions. Very interesting one. Yeah, the Ukraine war. Oh, that's the phenomenon that I don't think no one wants to see, that kind of a tragic situations, because it is war, and what do you expect from the war? It's just the human suffering, the very devastating and horrific situations. What we see is just the death of the people, the damage of the building, and also the barbaric behavior of the parties to the conflict. It seems like, since it is war and the law is silent, it seems like if there is since it is war and there's no rules, but it is not true. You know that there's a law of war that only applies in the very exceptional situations it is armed conflict. So even war has limits, and this law of war, made up by the treaties, Geneva Conventions, the additional protocol, that both of the parties to the conflict in Ukraine war has already become the party to those conventions, meaning that they should comply with the rules of war. So the law of war prohibits the attack against civilian populations, prohibits the killing of those who are not taking part in hostilities, and those who are no longer taking part in hostilities, like surrender soldiers, for example. But again, since it is law of war that applies in the very chaotic situation, it has limitations. First, it cannot stop the war. It cannot stop the parties to the conflict to use violence. So the law of war is not exist during the peacetime. It exists when two parties to the conflict use their force against each other. So this law cannot stop the war. This law can only minimize the casualties because of the war by giving protections to those who are no longer or who are not taking part in hostilities. And the second one, this law cannot protect everyone who are affected by this armed conflict. For example, the civilians that presents around the vicinity of the hostilities, around the military objective. When they finally get affected by the attack from the enemy, it cannot be considered as the violation of law of war. It can be considered as the collateral damage. So yeah, the law of war cannot protect everyone who are affected by the war. And also the law of war cannot mix between the purpose of the war, whether it is rational or no, and the behavior of war itself. So the parties to the conflict cannot justify their conduct by violating the law of war by saying that the reason I wage the war is rational, is legitimate. So then I can do whatever I want by killing the people, by killing the civilian objects, by destroying the hospitalities, for example.
Right. Well, we are aware that some countries have imposed sanctions against Russia for its military action there. From the law of war perspective, both parties are in violation, especially true for Russia, which is one of the permanent members of the UN Security Council. Is there any chance to bring the country to justice according to this law? And what kind of sanctions can be imposed on Russia under international law?
Yeah. As we see, we know that we see that both parties to the conflict, during the war, both parties to the conflict violates the law of war. Both parties to the conflict. It's not just Russia, but also the Ukraine. So then, under the Geneva Conventions, when there's a violation of the law of war, it is the obligations of every state parties to the Geneva Conventions, when the perpetrator presents in their territory, to bring them, to investigate them, to bring them before the national court. So that at the national level, it's obligations of every state, meaning that if the Russian government, for example, allegedly committed war crimes, they are not safe when they want to travel around the world, because as the party to the Geneva Convention, the state has obligations to bring them before their own national court, regardless their nationality. That's at the national level. The second one, we see now there is an ongoing proceeding before the two form of judicial body under the international law. First one is the International Court of Justice, and the second one is International Criminal Court. The difference is International Criminal Justice seeks to ask the responsibility of the state. So, the form of responsibility of the state is just the compensations or restitutions. But it's not a sufficient for the victims, because what happened in the field is the crimes. So someone has to be responsible individually for committing the crimes. Now, then we have another type of court. It is International Criminal Court that is still also ongoing now to investigate what the crimes committed within the Ukraine territory, because the Ukraine in this case has already accepted the jurisdictions of International Criminal Court. Hence, any kind of the allegations of the war crimes occurred within the Ukraine territory is now being investigated by this court for the individual to be held responsible criminally. So there are two types of the responsibility in this case. Both state has to be responsible before the International Court of Justice. The proceeding is ongoing now, and also the International Criminal Court for the individual criminal responsibility. So still, even though Russia is the great power, it is still possible under international law to be held liable for allegedly committing war crimes.
Are there lessons learned from the war in Ukraine for Indonesia from the law of war perspective?
Yes, of course. Well, we are not expecting that there will be a war in Indonesia, but still, from the Ukraine war, we can have the positive lessons. For example, that Indonesia is also party to the Geneva Convention since 1958, and as a party to the Geneva Conventions, our obligation is not just after the armed conflict occurred, but also during the peacetime. For example, the state party should make sure that the locations of the military objective is not close to the civilian populations. It should be far away from the civilian population. So in the case that there is a war and the enemy wants to attack the military objective, the civilian will be protected and cannot be considered as a collateral damage in the case that they got killed. That's one of the positive lesson that we can learn from the Ukraine war. And the second one is that, during the Ukraine war, the Ukrainian government recruited a lot of civilians and also distributed the weapons among the civilians because they voluntarily want to engage in hostilities. So the civilian, and it's also possible in Indonesia because our legal system, our defense system also recognize that kind of method. So then Indonesia, has to make sure that not just the armed forces, but also civilian, they understand the law of war. When they finally decided to carry the weapon, they realize that they are no longer protected. They can be killed or they can kill others. And then they're also aware about, the prisoner of war status, for example, because there are some conditions that has to be met for the people or the armed forces who wants to be treated as a prisoner of war, and civilian also possible. So then they have to understand what kind of conditions to be treated as prisoner of war, and then what is the consequences if their civilians want to engage in war, in the law of war. So that's something that we can educate during the peacetime.
Okay, it's really interesting because yes, like you mentioned, and also when such condition presents itself to people of a land, of a nation, of course people would like to, they want to defend their homeland. They want to protect their property, their families, and their neighborhood. So there's going to be a lot of gray areas when it's actually happening right in front of you. Now, if we give thought to civilization history, humanity has suffered a great deal from World War II. So do you see any reflection and similarities? And also maybe throughout the Cold War, there's a lot of proxy wars happening as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, the Ukraine war, is one of the evidence that war is a reality. We cannot avoid the war. War is violent, and violence cannot be predicted. It is unpredictable. So we should see the war, even though it's it's something that we should avoid of, but then the war is a reality that no one can avoid of. So then of course then we what we should aware now is that the law of war is evolved because of the war. You know that, for example, after the World War II, before the World War II, it is impossible for the individual who commit the war crimes to be brought before the international court. It is impossible.
Right.
Because it is not recognized at that time. The individual, the persons can be brought before the international court. But after the World War II, the U.S. and also the Allies established the Nuremberg Tribunal that is have the jurisdictions to bring the individual before the court for committing an extraordinary crime such as war crimes. Why? Because the perpetrators of the war crimes is the leaders, it's the president, which is impossible to their own nations brought their own president before their own court. It's the policy of the state to wage war against another. So if it's just focused on the national law, it is impossible to bring the most responsible persons to justice. So there has to be international level that involve in the enforcement mechanisms, and it just happened after World War II. So even though it is, it is something that we don't want to see the casualties, but then still we have a lot of law evolutions because of that kind of war. So again, law is something that has to answer the reality. Law cannot just repeat itself because it doesn't prepare for the upcoming situations. No, law should provide justice, should ensure justice, should provide answer for the reality. So because of war occurred, then law is evolved and progressed, and then always prepare for ensuring the justice.
Yes, and it will keep on evolving because the rules of engagement always changes as well. When there's more laws, of course, there's opportunities for perhaps black operations as well, covert operations that are not full-fledged wars. So, and what's also been happening ever since the World War II, there's a lot of proxy wars as well. So countries who are they're stuck in the middle between bigger powers can become victims as well. So, but we'd love to talk more with you on the subject. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and we stay safe, and hopefully we'll speak with you soon on this matter, and hopefully the war in Ukraine will also end soon. So that's all we wish for right now. So thank you, Dr. Diajeng Christianti, for your time.